Today's video is about the question, what do you do if you're in a relationship where there's conflict and the person that you're in conflict with does not see themselves in any way responsible? They think it's all about you. So they're not willing to look at themselves and you're sort of stuck. Well, I'm going to talk about this from the standpoint of having done a lot of counseling with couples and coaching with individuals about their recovery from addiction, which then led to relationship breakdown. And part of the recovery process was working on restoring the relationship, right? It's one thing if you have a couple that comes to you and there's a conflict, or let's say it's a church situation, a church relationship, and there's a problem in a relationship and there's this conflict and both parties are there and they both recognize that they may be at fault in some way, that they both need to do something or look at themselves in some way. That's one thing if you're in a situation like that. Usually it doesn't work that way. Usually you're talking to one person, one party in the conflict, whether it be a spouse in a marriage or a person in some other relationship, and the other person is not there with you and doesn't think they need to be. So how do you deal with it then? So over the years in the recovery counseling and coaching that I was doing and the working with people, whether they were the addict themselves in long-term recovery and working on their relationship, or with the spouse of someone who's an addict and is in recovery, I developed this approach, and it's some numbers. I'm going to throw out the principle in terms of numbers. The principle is what I'm going to call the 90-10-9 approach. 90-10-9. So what that means is when we have a conflict, 90 and 10 represents the percentage of time and energy we put forth on diagnosing the problem with so-and-so. In other words, if I'm in a conflict with somebody, my tendency is to spend 90% of my mental energy focusing on what that person is doing or saying or not doing, how they're failing in some way, how they've hurt me, and how they don't get it, right? And so most of what I think about is what they have done or said. And if I'm thinking about having a conversation with them, I get into this pattern, and some of you will relate to this. We get in these patterns where we have these fantasized conversations, right? We're having this conversation in our head where we're imagining ourselves saying just the right thing to that person. We're telling them off in just the right way, right? So that's what we're thinking about, how we can fix this other person. Now, we're not narcissists, we're not total narcissists, we're not total sociopaths. We recognize that we might be a little bit at fault. You know, there might be a little, maybe 10% of the issue is about us. I could probably do something, I could probably say this a little differently, I could probably have been a little nicer. But the bulk of our attention and energy is on what the other person has done. And I'll tell you what, when I work with people, whether that be couples, about marriages, or in a consulting role with, let's say, a relationship conflict in a church or a staff, or just, in my own church where there's conflict, here's how I can tell the 90-10 thing is at play. I can be in a conversation and I'll bring up something that the other person, let's say I've got someone in my room, and then I will say, well, if you made such and such a change, maybe if you're doing this and it's probably not very helpful, we get the yeah, but sputtering response. Yeah, but what about what she said, or what about how they're doing this, right? So in other words, it's a very quick instinctive response to not focus on what I need to change, but to remind the counselor guy that they need to change. What are they doing wrong, right? We get into that really quickly because we want to spend the majority of our focus on how they need to change. And you know what? Your relationship is not going to work. You're not going to fix it with that sort of mindset, because all you'll do then is continue to reinforce in your mind And you'll have the selective thinking to just notice the things that reinforce your idea of how messed up the other person is, how unfair they are, how unreasonable they're being. So here's how the 90-10 split works. What I suggest, if you want to fix this, if you want to move forward, that you do the only thing that you can do, that you change the only thing that you have the power to change, which is yourself. And so instead of spending 90% of your energy on what they are doing wrong and what you wish they would change, how you feel wronged by them, spend 90% of your time and energy on yourself, thinking about what you need to do, how you need to show up in the relationship, what you can do to improve the relationship, or what you can do, let's say in a marriage relationship, to be the husband that your wife needs, or to be the kind of wife that your husband needs, to do what is the appropriate thing and what's going to be the helpful thing for the other person, regardless of what happens, regardless of whether they respond kindly, regardless of whether they are happy about it, regardless of whether they one day wake up and realize how wrong they are. Just do what you need to do for the health of the relationship. Be the person that you need to be. Spend 90% of your time focused on that for 9 months. That's where the 9 comes in. And this came out in the work that I was doing with couples, and there was, conversation about, should we separate? Should we divorce? Those kinds of things, because this is not working. This person just does not hear me. They are unwilling to do X, Y, or Z. This is not working. And so what I would say is I'd plead with them, let's do this 90-10 shift and live that way for 9 months. And then let's have this conversation about whether you need to make a change in the relationship. Now, clarify a couple things. I'm not suggesting that you make this 90-10 shift and then in the process of, spending 90% of your focus on what you need to do, how you need to be in the relationship, that implies that you become a doormat for the next 9 months, that you put up with, that you become willing to tolerate things that are abusive, that are, hurtful. You may need to, as part of, being the husband or wife that you need to be, you may need to establish and maintain certain boundaries. Maybe we'll do a different video about this topic, but one of the things that I think is especially important is for couples to learn how to, and to practice discipline in how they fight, how they argue, and to not put up with, to not be in situations where there's raging going on, where there's name calling, that kind of disrespect, to at that point say, look, we need to take a break and let's come back. I will talk to you when you're not raging like this. I will talk to you when you're not name calling like this. So, we may need to do things like that. I'm not suggesting by putting 90% of the focus on your behavior that you now start to tolerate things that are really dangerous. And the other thing that I would say is, or dangerous to the relationship, the other thing that I would say is, if there are things that are dangerous to you, if there's abuse and even especially violence, you need to do what you need to do to be safe and get out of there. Don't wait for 9 months. So let's be clear about that. But in the vast majority of relationships where that kind of danger is not there, that kind of destructive behavior is not there, work on yourself for the period of 9 months and then see what happens. Now, in marriage relationships, we literally would talk about 9 months as a marker. In other relationships, other situations, let's think of this as a guideline or a principle. It takes 9 months for a baby to be conceived and to grow inside a mother's womb. It takes 9 months for a new life to develop, inside a mother's womb. So in relationships, we need to allow a certain amount of time for genuine change and transformation to take place. And so if a relationship is not as intense, and if the relationship problems have not been, so long-standing, maybe it doesn't need to be 9 literal months, but for a length of time, for a reasonable length of time, and that time is probably longer than you think it would be, you focus on bringing to the table in the relationship what the other person needs, and to stop insisting on or stop looking for that person to respond in the way that you think they should, right? And see what happens. Because what I found is a lot of times when we do that, real transformation does happen. That a spouse who's unwilling to listen, over time they see this change behavior, they see the respect and they see the love demonstrated, then they do become willing to listen. Relationships in a church, opportunities for genuine conversation start to happen. Again, over time, as respect and compassion is demonstrated. So then at that point, whether it's 9 literal months or some other time in the future, then you evaluate. Then you look, and again, hopefully there will be change, that the other person, it becomes clear this other person is more willing to look at themselves, and then you can work in a different way, in a more mutual way on the relationship. Maybe you will do this work, show up in the way that you need to show up, be the husband or be the wife, show the care that you need to show, and still there's no change. Still it's dysfunctional. Still they're behaving in really inappropriate, unkind, unhelpful ways. Then you can make some decisions about what you want to do moving forward. And certainly if it's a couple in a marriage relationship, there's a variety of options, things you can change about how you relate. Maybe it's separate for a time. Maybe it's have in-house separation. Maybe it's insisting on counseling or whatever, mutual counseling together before you move forward. Maybe it's you need to take a break from each other. It can all be on the table. But what I'm saying is none of that should be on the table until you do this work of working on yourself, showing up in a different way, and then seeing what might happen. Now, one final thing that I'll say about this process is that if you make that change in relationships, it can be challenging, it can be painful, to look at yourself and to feel like you're changing and giving, and you're giving and changing much more than the other person is, and you're feeling like you're giving and doing more than the other person maybe deserves, and it's challenging. So what I say to people is, if you want to do this, if you're going to do this, you need support. You need added encouragement, added reminders and support for you to sustain this kind of behavior. Whether that is there someone in your life who could be that for you? Is there a group that you're a part of that you could lean on someone or a couple people in that group? Maybe the spiritual teacher in the community you're a part of, therapist. I provide this support for people that I work with individually and in group settings. You can reach out to me on the website that I have. You'll see that in the show notes below, but get somebody to lean on to help you as you go about making these changes.